Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our latest webinar in our Navigating the Uncharted series. This is a webinar series that we, the National Conflict Resolution Center, developed about a year and a half ago to really help workplace leaders and employees navigate through some of the more challenging issues that are facing our workplaces today. And I can't think of a more challenging issue than navigating through workplaces and thinking about civic engagement during a heated political election year. And so we're so excited today to kind of have this topic at the forefront and to be able to talk about this with our incredible guest speaker, who I will introduce in just a moment. So a little bit more about this series. We encourage you to follow us and tune in whenever you can. These webinars are always free to you. They are always right around 30 minutes, so very easy to digest and catch at a lunch break or afternoon break. And we always are trying to look at topics that are relevant and timely. Today, we're gonna hear from our amazing speaker and have an opportunity for a little bit of Q&A. Because it is 30 minutes, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. I want to just say up front that we might not get to all the questions. I'll be asking some to get us started and presenting a little bit of information to give us some background. And then we will try to get to some of your questions, so feel free to put them out there in the Q&A. If we don't get to all of them today, and again, it's probably likely that we won't with just 30 minutes and respecting your time, please know that we're going to follow up with you. So we're going to reconnect with Lewis. We're going to write up a little article, and we'll send that out afterwards along with the recording of the webinar. So still put them in there. They're valuable to have, and we appreciate hearing from you throughout this conversation. So without further ado, I want to introduce Louis Lozado, who is our guest speaker with us today. And Louis is the CEO of Democracy Works, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that collaborates with election officials, leading tech platforms, and really world-class partners to drive voter access and participation. And he's going to talk with us a little bit today about the Civic Alliance and the work that they are doing with businesses around the country to really encourage civic engagement and voter participation in partnership with businesses. So welcome, Louis. It's great to have you.
Absolutely happy to be here. Thank you, Ashley, for inviting us in for the chat.
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned that Democracy Works and the CAA Foundation came together in 2020 to create the Civic Alliance. I think that most folks will recognize CAA as a creative artist agency, and the foundation is their charitable arm. So I want to make sure that we called them out, given that they couldn't be represented on the call today.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to ask you about that, actually. So I think this is great. In 2020, Democracy Works and the CAA Foundation came together to create Civic Alliance. And Civic Alliance is America's premier nonpartisan coalition of, and this amazes me, over 1,300 member companies united by a commitment to democracy and active participation in safe, accessible, and trusted, I think that word is really important, trusted elections. So tell us a little bit more about the story behind that. How did you come together and think of this idea?
Sure. So Democracy Works, the organization that I lead, and as you mentioned, a C3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, we focus on civic engagement and civic education. And how we do that is we develop products and collect and distribute data to support voters and election officials, via the apps, sites, and groups that voters trust. And examples of these platforms, include Google, Bing, Facebook, TikTok. Essentially, if you are looking for voting information on a social media platform or a search engine, there is a high likelihood that it originated at Democracy Works. And Democracy Works has long been working with companies in the civic engagement space. Examples include Starbucks and Salesforce, and it was to help them equip their employees with actionable information about how to vote. Think about voter registration, knowing when there is an election afoot. It might not only be on election day as we think about in November, it might be at any point in the year. But we increasingly began to hear from companies that they wanted to do more for their employees and their customers. So in 2020, drawing on these experiences, it really was a no-brainer to marry a business community that sought to meaningfully engage in that particular election with us, where we sought a network of trusted messengers to go on this trust theme for the delivery of accurate voting information and election guidance. Unfortunately, relative to other countries in the world, voting in the United States can sometimes be complicated depending on where you're living. So you've heard me reference trust a couple of times already. We currently find ourselves in an era of declining trusts in institutions. There are fewer theaters for civic engagement. There are no more Walter Cronkites and Tom Brokaws and Peter Jennings. Messengers that are universally trusted by the entire electorate and the citizenry in the United States are harder and harder to find. But businesses, especially in their function as employers, are still overwhelmingly trusted relative to other institutions. And in 2020, we actually saw this during COVID, where employees often looked at their employer for information on, vaccine requirements and all the things that were going on when it came to reintegrating into the workplace, society, business, et cetera. So from our perspective, Democracy Works in the CAA Foundation, developing nonpartisan civic programs that align with the particular brand and the audience of our member companies, it created a potential to reach all of their employees, which if you're looking at the 1,300 member companies, numbers 5.8 million employees in the United States, or their customers, which represent just about every voter in the US. So that's kind of the backstory to it. It's like, we've got information, they're trusted messengers, they have a distribution channel, let's power it with good trusted information on how to vote.
That's amazing. And when you think about not only the 1,300 member companies, but then the ripple effect of that and how many millions of Americans that impacts, that's pretty amazing to think about. Speaking of trust and speaking of nonpartisanship, I know that you all must navigate the same thing that we do at the National Conflict Resolution Center, which is nonpartisanship is critical to our work. It's critical to people believing in what we do. Now, we're on the side more of helping people navigate the tricky conversations that come up around divisive issues and polarization, and we're equipping people with the tools to have those conversations effectively, and sometimes when there's outright conflict, we're the ones actually going in to help facilitate resolution and restorative dialogues. But that nonpartisan piece, that coming in neutrally piece, is really important. So how have you all found that you've been able to navigate the tricky business of that?
Yeah, so we get a lot of practice at nonpartisanship at Democracy Works Maine, because of the relationships that we have with election offices around the country, no matter whether it's a blue state, red state, green state, whatever you have, we have to be beyond reproach, because if we're not going to get that critical data that feeds the engine, the search engines, the social media platforms, that gets the information to voters that's critical for them. I also want to draw a distinction between the work of politics and the work of elections. Politics is what you see on TV. Elections is what you don't see on TV. And it's those critical public servants that are really just trying to figure out ways that they can ensure that people can participate in the election. And it's similar to what we do here. So just to kind of level set here, difference between politics and elections should not be partisan. They really are a vehicle by which we elect officials, not by which we arrange ourselves into tribes. Having said all that, democracy and elections in the US have been polarized. And it's made it a difficult conversation to have in the workplace because, understandably, organizations, companies, they don't want to inject topics into the workplace that they perceive as being polarizing. What I'm here to say is the work of democracy, the work of civic engagement, the work of being an active citizen in the country should not be something that we should disagree upon. We have differences of opinion when it comes to the subject matter, the issues, but the institutions that protect us, the offices and the public servants that run elections, none of that should be polarized. And again, we get a lot of practice on this stuff. We keep a nonpartisan stance. We work with folks on every side of the aisle. It's just something that is in our DNA, and it manifests itself with the Civic Alliance. I talked about earlier how we try to, or we aim to develop civic programs that align with the particular brand of the company. There are very few companies that are going to be, all the way to one side or another of the aisle. They are necessarily in business. They want to appeal to the broadest consumer base, and we assist them in doing that, and we're taking their brand into consideration. When we ask for companies to use their resources, use their brand in support of democracy, we understand that's an investment, and we want to do what we can to make sure that we're not putting them into hot water, but instead giving them the tools to empower their employees and or their customers to participate in democracy.
So tell me a little bit more about these companies. What do you think, motivated so many companies to join Civic Alliance, and kind of, I guess, what's the value that they get out of it?
Absolutely. So I mentioned earlier in 2020, there was a lot of energy around that election. And companies saw it as a value proposition to being civically engaged, whether it's in appealing to your customers, because folks, there are examples like Tom's and other brands where, making a connection between, the heartstring of the consumer and the mission of your organization drives value. It's a great recruitment tool as well. I mean, folks, overwhelmingly in the United States, they like to work for companies that are values aligned, that are doing something for the public good. So participating in the Civic Alliance really helped satisfy at least those two business imperatives. I think there's a bigger business imperative here when it comes to democracy relative to other systems of government. It's good for markets. It's good for business. So there's also this element of what we'll call selfish giving, for lack of a better term, where you want to make investments in clarity of government and in the populace, the citizenry, feeling like their opinions, their desires are being reflected at the polling place, that they're participating in a functioning democracy, and companies, especially in the United States, benefiting for probably the greatest economy in the history of the world. I always see it as, hey, this is making a deposit and continuing that democracy, that healthy democracy that's created, a burgeoning and thriving economy where so many people can benefit from it. Um, there's also this concept when it comes to, if we for a second will agree that it can be a controversial topic, this topic of elections, safety in numbers. It's a lot more difficult for one or two companies to step out on the ledge than it is 1,300 companies. At that point, you've got the air cover, you're operating in coalition, you're operating in community. And at the same time, you're also able to learn from other companies that are deploying or participating in some of the civic education and civic engagement resources that the Civic Alliance provides. So it's a holistic approach to civic engagement in the corporate/business/workplace sector. It allows you to do trial and error at scale, and it allows you to learn from your peers in the space. So, I mean, I believe there's a lot to be gained for participating in the Civic Alliance because, again, it's resources for getting, your staff or your customers engaged, and it's primed and directed towards nonpartisan activities. What we're talking about is paid time off to vote, paid time off to serve as a poll worker recruitment for your staff or your customers. We have member companies, an example of which is Bad Robot, which helped us put together or help the Civic Alliance or through the Civic Alliance or a Civic Alliance member that hosted polling locations. Old Navy is an example of a real shining star when it came to poll worker recruitment. These are all things that don't have a partisan lens or stripe, but advance the citizenry and make it easier for folks to participate in democracy. And it has the benefit of creating a nice halo effect for the participating company.
So that was a great overview, I think, of what the value is to companies for joining Civic Alliance, the resources that they get, the information that they have, the support from other companies. I love that piece of it. What is the ask of them, of the companies, whether large or small, to be part of Civic Alliance? And does it look different if you're, a large company with, 120,000 employees versus a mom and pop store with, 10 employees?
Absolutely. I'll address that by pointing to one of the promo videos that we cut for this chat, where I talked about, like, it really isn't the size of the organization. We're seeing impact from organizations of all sorts of sizes. Like I mentioned, Bad Robot earlier. J.J. Abrams, that's a production studio. They don't have tens of thousands of employees, but they put together a polling location. And we think about sometimes the long distances or even long lines that people need to wait on in order to cast a ballot. If you're a company that's setting up a polling location, that really is significant impact for the people in that community. Another example, Tony's Chocolonely, a smaller company that, if I were to hold out as an example of a company that is really doing everything to hit all the steps in what we've outlined as the civic journey, which you can find in the corporate civic playbook that Civic Alliance puts out. These are organizations that are smaller in terms of employees, but they're using what brand they have and the megaphone that they have to really, really lean in hard into democracy. And that's really the commitment that we're looking for from the companies. Meaningful commitment, pro-democracy initiatives leaning in. I mentioned some of the examples earlier. Host voter registration drives, not only for your employees, especially if you're one of the smaller companies, but for your customers, because smaller companies likely have a lot of employees. It's polling location, setting those up. It's poll worker recruitment. There's always challenges in certain areas of the country when it comes to recruiting folks to work at the polls, and especially as we talk about these conflict-ridden and polarizing times. Some people might not want to go out and work, as a poll worker because of what they hear. And I think that when you trust the company and they're telling you, hey, we think that you should become a poll worker, we're doing this, it makes that individual a little bit more comfortable with stepping out on the ledge and doing that sort of work. We're looking for companies, especially in 2024, because that's when everyone pays attention to presidential elections. It's not like there aren't elections every year, but they tend to pay more attention to presidentials. This year, we're asking for our member companies to lean in a little bit more. And as I mentioned, we have steps along a civic journey that talk about engaging your employees, engaging your customers, being good corporate citizens, making it a pro civic environment in your workplace and among your customers. Those are the sorts of commitments that we're looking for, and there are specifics on each of them that can be found in the corporate civic playbook.
So one of I think our questions that has come in, to just draw from the audience a little bit here, that it touches so beautifully on something you and I have talked a little bit about, is, are there companies who really resist this idea? We've talked a lot about the companies who want to sign on, the value for them, but, are there companies who resist this idea, and why? And the connection I'm making to that, with our work at NCRC, is that there absolutely are companies that we've worked with that hesitate to bring up election or voting, or even democracy, even though you've delineated so clearly there's a difference between kind of polarized politics and democracy, but because the typical person doesn't think of that when they hear election or they hear. And so I think there are probably companies, and you're nodding like you've experienced that, who've hesitated because of that fear. So how do you kind of help overcome that?
Yeah, so our starting proposition is we meet companies where they are. I mean, there are folks that are really pro democracy and citizenry, and shining examples that we can all recognize will include a Salesforce or a Patagonia. These are folks that you look at that company and they lead with their chin, so to speak. And then there are other companies that want to do more, but have understandable concerns about the polarity of the topic. And I think many of us grew up in environments we were told, well, you're not supposed to discuss religion and politics at the dinner table. I'm not sure I agree with that anymore, because whether you like it or not, that conversation is happening, and it's likely happening in your workplace. So why not use your workplace, a place where individuals of all backgrounds and stripes are already coming together to solve problems, their business problems, their business projects. These are places that are already serving as classrooms. Many companies are doing DEI curriculum or professional development. So what we have here when it comes to civic education, nonpartisan civic education, is an opportunity to use that very classroom and add a new topic to the curriculum, and one that is topical because these are already people of voting age. I think that we can have all sorts of conversations about the deterioration of civic education at the high school and middle school levels in the country. But here we are, a new classroom, here in the workplace. And, doing that, making it comfortable within the guidelines and the structures of an organization where people typically don't get too out of pocket when they disagree on a business matter, apply those principles to civics. And it gives us a formula to be able to reframe the conversation where it's less about polarities and more about education and getting people talking rather than talking past each other.
Well, now you are speaking our language for sure. And actually, that's funny. I was going to share this slide anyway, so I'm just going to pull it up now. What I would add to that, kind of from the angle that we come at it from, and the communication angle, is that exactly what you said, Louis. I think as an organization, as a company, you can try to avoid divisive conversations. The reality is that workplaces are not places for most workplaces are not places to advance your political agenda. In fact, a lot of workplaces have policies that say you can't advance your political agenda here. However, conversations are going to come up. And one thing that we talk about so often is that really in our country, we have lost the art of disagreement. We've really lost the ability to have healthy conversations. And I think you would agree, democracy is built on the idea that we do disagree, and that we need to kind of have back and forth on ideas so that we continue to refine and we continue to come together and progress. And so one of the things that we talk about in terms of some of the strategies you can take as a workplace leader or team leader is to think about creating belonging in your workplace kind of before politically charged flashpoints come into the workplace. And so just a couple of tips for anyone who's watching that we really encourage is, create opportunities for employees to get to know each other outside of work. Really look for ways that employees start to see each other as other humans instead of the other, and if I know that person X also has a kid who plays soccer and is around the same age as my kid, even if they see differently than I do, politically about something, and that comes up, I'm less likely to just completely ignore or other them, because at least we have that connection, And so creating opportunities to just build relationships with the employees. I think, build shared identities around things that are not political. And I think just civic engagement could be one of those things, right? Like even talking about what is the difference between civic engagement and political discussion. And I've loved the things you brought up here about that today. I also think, this last bullet, and I won't spend a ton of time on each one of them, but this last bullet of really creating safe, highly structured dialogue opportunities, that's something I think that can sound pretty terrifying to some workplace leaders, but the highly structured piece of it, bringing in, facilitators, whether those are outside facilitators or outside speakers or internal, but creating highly structured opportunities for people to put ideas on the table. It helps us overcome that lost art of disagreement problem to where we're really creating respectful, safe environments for people to engage with one another. And so these are some of the things that we talk about with organizations all the time, saying, don't completely avoid it or pretend like it's never going to happen, but prepare ahead of time for flashpoints and for these things by empowering your organization with relationships and a human-centered approach, building around shared identities, values, missions of your company, those types of things, so that they're not as bad, or that's not all we know about the other person when it comes up. And then I think we have time for just one more question before getting into some resources. Want to leave you all with some amazing resources here today. So the last question for you, Louis, which I like, is what personally got you into this? What was your interest in this work?
Oh boy, that's a long and winding story. I'll start with this. How a bill becomes a law. PBS. Very early in life, I developed a love of government and social studies, and really whether it was making sure I knew the capital of every state to understanding the three branches of government. I was fascinated by democracy, the system of government, even the history of of governments around the world. And, and I went to law school and became an attorney and did all the things where you really, get an understanding of civics. But I think it was also in 2020, around the time that the Civic Alliance was born, that I saw a kind of illness in the country, and an issue going on with the level of discourse and the level of disagreement, and kind of a breakdown in key institutions. And I wanted to throw my hat in the ring and figure out what of my experience and my skills I could lend towards trying to solve for it. So, before going to law school, I was a techie, and so I have that tech background, the legal background, and it really worked well for the sort of work that Democracy Works does, which is really leveraging technology and data and using it to reach people. And when it comes to the Civic Alliance, it's just a perfect vehicle for us. We're going to crescendo a little bit on this matter of trust. Um, Folks are able to engage in healthy conflict if they're in a trusting environment. At least that's my opinion. I won't try to preach to the preachers when it comes to conflict, but that's the way I see it. And it's kind of the way that I've tried to build my career, and getting into situations where there might be a lack of trust, increasing that trust factor so that we have healthy conflict, which ultimately will lead to results. And I think that anyone that's participating in this democracy or living in this country, that's what they want from their elected officials, results. So it's building block stuff, it's reverence for government, and just a real appreciation of the system that we live in and the opportunities we're given by living in this country.
I love that your backstory is actually the living, walking the walk of what y'all are doing, right? You saw a need, you were feeling maybe a little disenchanted with what's going on, and your answer to that was, I need to be involved. I need to, do my civic duty and be involved here. That's amazing.
Absolutely. And what we do is that we invite all these companies to also get involved.
I love that. Well, we don't want to leave you all without some resources. And so we are going to spend just the next minute or two here wanting to share a couple of resources with you. So first thing is, and we put these in easy QR codes, so you just hold your phone up and you can be directed to these pages. We, the National Conflict Resolution Center, we offer free work resources for workplace leaders. You will find literally hundreds of videos, downloads, webinars, past webinars that you can access on this page. And they have to do with everything from how to, like, any challenging conversation you can imagine, how to give constructive feedback, how to manage conflict, how to have, polarized conversations, how to navigate those things, including most recently, we've developed 10 tips for navigating the political divide, along with some really, really healthy tips for just actually sentence starters and questions to ask and what to say. So encourage you to take a look at that and download that as a resource for you. And this is really useful. I'm sure many of us are thinking this right now, not only for work, but especially even in our own personal relationships out there. So take a look at that. Also want to encourage you all that for those of you who are looking for kind of an elevated experience in learning how to navigate that lost art of disagreement. If you are a workplace leader, we've developed a certificate program for workplace leaders to really walk you through 4 of our most popular workshops, looking specifically at how we are approaching some of the most difficult societal issues today. And so encourage you to take a look at the certificate program if you're interested in that. And then finally, and drum roll please, we also have the QR code here to download the corporate civic playbook that Lewis mentioned earlier. I have had a chance to read through this. It's absolutely fascinating, filled with data and information, really supporting this idea that businesses who support civic engagement see a bottom line result from that. They see the benefits of it. And so I found this to be a really amazing read, and really motivating to be involved in the concepts of Civic Alliance. So hope you enjoy those resources. Lewis, I want to thank you so much for joining us here today. I feel like NCRC and Democracy Works and Civic Alliance have so much in common, and I really hope it's the beginning of us doing a lot of work together.
Absolutely. Get out and vote, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.